If you need to require your students to complete the online assumption of risk waiver before they move on to the content in your class, we can easily modify one of the modules inside of Canvas to act as kind of a gate, a stopping point for our students from moving on into the course itself. And it all begins with the module itself. So I just have, this is the module that comes with every single Canvas course inside of our CRC instance of Canvas. And of course, here's the assumption of risk waiver itself. If you look very carefully here, it's worth 1 point. And the only question inside the ungraded survey that's worth a point is the official I agree button. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Notice how the name questions all are 0 points. The emergency contact phone number is worth 0. However, the moment we get to the final question, which is where they agree to the assumption of risk, it's worth 1 point. So the only way to get a singular point for this assumption of risk waiver is to agree to the waiver. Now, we can use this point value as a stopping point for our students moving on inside of the course content. Let's go back into our modules tool in Canvas, and I'll show you how we can set this up. You don't have to do this. This is purely optional, but if you really want to stop your students from moving on into the course content before they sign the waiver, this is a great way of doing it. I'm going to go ahead and just create a second module here, and we'll call this, I don't know, week 1. There we go. Okay, and now I'm going to add a prerequisite. Now, for this prerequisite, I need them to successfully complete the assumption of risk waiver module. Okay, so this is this module here will not be unlocked until this module is completed. So let's go ahead and add it in. So now this has a prerequisite. In order for the students to enter into week 1 and start consuming all the content in this module, we need to set up the assumption of risk waiver module with a requirement. Let me show you how that works. I'm going to cruise down to the far right-hand side of this row to the triple dots icon, and I'm going to edit the properties of this module. And I'm going to add a requirement. Now, in here, it says student must complete all of these requirements. Well, I'm going to say sign the assumption of risk waiver itself. This is the ungraded survey. It's technically, it lives within inside the quiz architecture inside of Canvas, but it's an ungraded survey. And I don't want them to just view it. I want them to score at least 1 point. I need them to get 1 out of 1. Since there's only one question that has a single point associated with it, this is our best way to ensure that they have agreed and hit that little I agree button in the waiver itself. So now we'll update the module, and then if we look at it, it's changed, or it will change ever so slightly inside of Student View. Now what they'll see when they successfully complete this waiver, they'll see a little check here. It'll look very similar to the published and unpublished check mark, but there'll be a little check here that communicates quite wonderfully to them and to us that they've completed this, and they'll be able to move on inside of the course itself. So the first thing is that we got to make a prerequisite on a content course and then have a requirement on the assumption of risk waiver module that allows them to check against the score of the waiver itself before they can start looking at the content and participating in the rest of the class. You don't necessarily have to have this inside of your course, nor do you necessarily have to have this inside of the assumption of risk module itself. If you'd like, you're more than welcome to take this ungraded survey, put it in your orientation module, do whatever you like with it. You're free to move all this around, but this idea of making the content of this module be a requirement before we can move on to the content of this module may help us ensure that our students are physically signing the waiver before they move on in the class.